Maria LaGuerta knew the truth. Dexter Morgan wasn't just a brilliant blood-spatter analyst. He was the Bay Harbor butcher. While everyone else trusted him, LaGuerta followed her instincts and uncovered the chilling reality he worked so hard to hide. But how did she connect the dots? And what drove her to risk everything to expose him? This is the story of how Maria LaGuerta came closer than anyone to revealing Dexter's darkest secret. For Maria, the first red flag wasn't about Dexter Morgan. It was about James Dokes. When the evidence started to point to Dokes as the Bay Harbor butcher, Maria's instincts kicked in. Something didn't sit right. Sure, Dokes had a reputation, abrasive, hot-tempered, and impossible to ignore. He made enemies as easily as he made arrests. But a serial killer? That didn't fit the man she knew, and she did know him. Their relationship was complex, shaped by years of professional respect and a hint of personal history. Dokes had a sharp edge, no doubt about that, but he also had a moral compass that rarely wavered. He was a man who lived by the rules, even if he didn't always play nice. The evidence against him, though, was overwhelming. Too overwhelming. Blood slides in his car, circumstantial links tying him to multiple crime scenes. It was also perfect. To Maria, it felt like someone was trying too hard. She had seen setups before, messy, rushed, and obvious. This wasn't that. This was meticulous, deliberate, and methodical. Whoever framed Dokes had gone to extraordinary lengths, with a level of precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the investigation. And that's when her gaze began to shift. Not to Dokes, but to Dexter Morgan. At first, the thought seemed absurd. Dexter was the quiet one, the dependable blood-spatter analyst who blended into the background. But as Maria revisited the details, a pattern began to emerge. Dexter was always close to the evidence, always present at the right or wrong moments. He was never the focus, but he was always there, just a step away from the spotlight. It wasn't just his proximity that stood out, it was how he handled himself. Unlike Dokes, whose intensity often spilled over, Dexter was unnervingly calm under pressure. Too calm. His explanations were always flawless, his demeanor always composed. To most people, that calmness was reassuring, a sign of his professionalism. But to Maria, it felt unnatural, forced, like a mask he wore to keep people from looking too closely. The pieces didn't fall into place all at once. There wasn't a single moment where she knew it was Dexter, but her instincts told her to keep watching him. And the more she watched, the more the cracks in his perfect facade began to show. Think about this for a moment. How often do we ignore our instincts because they seem irrational? How many times have you felt something was off but dismissed it as paranoia? Maria didn't have the luxury of ignoring her gut. She was standing on the edge of something massive, something no one else at Miami Metro seemed willing or able to see. But here's the real question. If you were in her position, surrounded by people who trusted Dexter completely, would you have dared to question him? Maria's courage didn't come from a hunch alone. It came from her relentless ability to analyze, to connect the dots no one else could see, and to act when others hesitated. She wasn't just chasing a lead. She was chasing a dangerous truth that could destroy more than just her career. It could unravel the fragile trust within the department. And yet, she pressed forward. She couldn't stop. What Maria didn't realize was that her decision to follow that first red flag would set her on a collision course with Dexter, one that would change both of their lives forever. At first, the signs were subtle, easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. But Maria was always paying attention. In the Bay Harbor butcher case, Dexter Morgan stood out in ways that others didn't notice, or chose to ignore. He always seemed to know more than anyone else. He spotted blood patterns no one else could, made connections that seemed almost too intuitive. To most, this was proof of Dexter's brilliance. He was the department's best forensic expert, the quiet analyst who solved puzzles others couldn't. But to Maria, it felt like something more, something unsettling. It wasn't just his insights that raised questions. Maria began noticing Dexter's absences. He had an uncanny knack for disappearing during critical moments, only to reappear with perfectly reasonable excuses. Running tests, visiting a crime scene, collecting evidence. Every explanation was logical, every excuse plausible. But as Maria scrutinized his movements, the patterns became impossible to ignore. Then came the moment that solidified her suspicions, the blood slide. It happened at the church where Travis Marshall, the doomsday killer, had been found dead. Amidst the chaos of the crime scene, Maria uncovered a small yet damning piece of evidence, a blood slide identical to those associated with the Bay Harbor butcher. This detail had never been made public, and the implications were chilling. For Maria, This wasn't just another clue. It was confirmation that James Dokes, long accused and posthumously vilified, couldn't have been the Bay Harbor butcher. Dokes had been dead for years, but the bloodslide was fresh, left behind at the scene of Travis Marshall's death. Whoever had planted it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the butcher's methods. Someone precise. Someone deliberate. Someone like Dexter Morgan. His name lingered at the edges of her mind, a suspicion that now felt impossible to ignore. Dexter was always present, always helpful, always calm, too calm. What once seemed reassuring now felt like a carefully constructed facade. His proximity to critical cases, his unshakable demeanor, and now this bloodslide. It all pointed to a chilling possibility. Think about this for a moment. If you were in Maria's position, piecing together clues that pointed to someone everyone trusted, what would you do? Would you confront them outright, or would you keep digging, knowing the truth could shatter everything? For Maria, this wasn't just about intuition anymore. The bloodslide was proof that her instincts had been right all along. Dexter wasn't just another analyst solving cases. He was at the center of the most terrifying one. And with each step, the truth became darker. But Maria didn't stop there. As she delved deeper, more inconsistencies began to surface. Dexter's fascination with the case wasn't just professional, it felt deeply personal. At crime scenes, his reactions were too precise, his insights too vivid. It wasn't just as if he were solving the case, it was as if he were reliving it. One moment stood out above all others. During a briefing about the Bay Harbor butcher, Dexter's tone shifted. While explaining the evidence, his words carried an unsettling weight. He described the killer's methods with a level of detail that felt almost reverent. Maria caught something in his eyes, a flicker she couldn't place. Was it pride? Familiarity? Recognition? She couldn't prove it yet, but she didn't need to. She could feel the pieces locking into place. And here's the real question. How often do we overlook the truth because it feels too impossible? How many times have you ignored your instincts, convincing yourself you were imagining things? Maria didn't have that luxury. The stakes were too high. Every clue brought her closer to a truth too dangerous to leave buried. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was about exposing a darkness hidden in plain sight. A darkness Dexter Morgan had spent his entire life perfecting. For Maria, there was no turning back. By now, you're probably wondering, why didn't she just confront Dexter? Why not call him out directly and watch his facade crumble under pressure? Because Dexter Morgan wasn't just any suspect. He was calculating, methodical, and dangerously intelligent. His entire life was a fortress, built brick by brick to hide his truth. Confronting him too soon wouldn't just have been reckless. It would have been fatal for her case. Maria understood this better than anyone. She knew Dexter wouldn't panic under direct accusation. He'd adapt, twist the narrative, and turn the department against her. A single misstep, and she'd lose everything. Not just her career, but any chance at exposing him. So she waited. She revisited old cases, combed through evidence, and started asking the kinds of questions that made people uneasy. Quietly but relentlessly, she pieced together the story no one else dared to see. And the deeper she dug, the more chilling the picture became. Dexter wasn't just hiding in plain sight, he was thriving there. His colleagues admired him for his precision, and even Maria's closest allies dismissed her suspicions. But where they saw a quiet genius, she saw something far more dangerous. The absences, the inconsistencies, the strange patterns that didn't add up. The cracks in Dexter's perfect facade were small, but they were there. His calmness under pressure, once seen as a sign of professionalism, now felt more like a carefully constructed mask. Every answer he gave seemed rehearsed, calculated to disarm suspicion. Imagine being in her position, working side by side with someone you knew was capable of unimaginable darkness, all while everyone else trusted them completely. Would you have kept going, knowing the odds were stacked against you? For Maria, there was no choice. The closer she got to the truth, the more isolated she became. Dexter noticed her scrutiny, saw her retracing his steps. He wasn't just watching her, he was preparing to counter her every move. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a game of strategy, one where the stakes were life and death. Maria knew that bringing down Dexter wouldn't just require evidence. It would require precision. One false move, and he would slip away, leaving her to take the fall. Most people would have stopped. The risks were too great, the isolation too overwhelming. But Maria LaGuerta wasn't most people. She pushed forward, even as the walls closed in around her. Every step she took brought her closer to the truth and closer to the point of no return. Exposing Dexter wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was about justice. And for Maria, justice was worth risking everything. As Maria got closer to the truth, everything started to unravel. It began with the blood slide found at the scene of Travis Marshall's death. A small, unassuming piece of evidence that carried enormous implications. Identical to the slides found in James Dokes's car, it was a signature detail of the Bay Harbor butcher. And Maria knew it hadn't been planted by Dokes. He was long dead. The discovery reignited her suspicions. She took the evidence to Tom Matthews, hoping his experience and influence would give her theory the weight it needed. But Matthews dismissed her concerns, laughing off the idea that Dexter Morgan, a reliable analyst and the department's quiet genius, could be the Bay Harbor butcher. For Matthews, the case was closed. Dokes was the culprit, and Maria's persistence was nothing more than misplaced loyalty. But Maria couldn't let it go. The blood slide was proof that the Bay Harbor butcher was still active, and her instincts pointed to Dexter. Quietly, she revisited old cases, analyzing patterns that others had overlooked. Dexter always seemed to be near the most critical pieces of evidence. His calmness, once seen as a sign of professionalism, now felt like a calculated mask. What Maria didn't realize was that Dexter had already taken notice of her suspicions. Every move she made, every question she asked, only sharpened his awareness. And while she was combing through evidence, Dexter was dismantling her credibility. He planted seeds of doubt among their colleagues, using her history with Dokes to paint her as biased and overly ambitious. Imagine being in her position. You've uncovered the darkest truth about someone everyone else trusts. The pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, but no one believes you. Would you have kept going, knowing the odds were stacked against you? For Maria, there was no choice. She knew the truth and she couldn't let it stay buried. The closer she got, the more isolated she became. But she didn't back down. She pursued the case relentlessly, even as Dexter worked to stay one step ahead. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was a battle of strategy, a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Maria knew that exposing Dexter would require absolute precision. One misstep, and he would escape, leaving her to face the fallout. But Dexter wasn't just waiting for her to fail. He was preparing for the inevitable moment when he'd have to act. Maria's relentless pursuit left him with no choice but to eliminate the threat she posed. The final confrontation came in a setting that carried the weight of every truth Maria had uncovered. A shipping container at the port. It was here that she intended to expose Dexter once and for all. She had gathered enough evidence to force an arrest, tying him to the Bay Harbor butcher killings. But Dexter, as always, was one step ahead. Maria wasn't alone. Deborah Morgan, torn between her loyalty to her brother and her duty as a police officer, arrived at the scene. What happened next was a collision of truths too heavy to bear. Maria pleaded with Deborah, begging her to see Dexter for who he truly was. "Do the right thing," she implored. "You're better than this." But Dexter's presence was a force Deborah couldn't overcome. Calm and composed, he urged her to protect him, to choose family over justice. The moment was raw, desperate, and utterly tragic. Deborah, trapped in an impossible choice, pulled the trigger. Imagine the weight of that decision. For Dexter, it was another calculated move to protect his secret. But for Deborah, it was the moment she sacrificed her own moral compass. She wasn't just losing Maria, she was losing herself. Even in her final moments, Maria's defiance never wavered. She had uncovered the truth and stood by it, no matter the cost. Her death wasn't a failure. It was a testament to her bravery and unyielding determination. For Dexter, Maria's death marked another step deeper into darkness. For Deborah, it was a breaking point, a moment she would never recover from. And for us, the viewers, it was the moment the series took its darkest turn. Maria wasn't just another victim. She was a symbol of justice and the unimaginable cost of pursuing it. Maria was far from perfect, flawed, ambitious, relentless. But more than anything, she was brave. When no one else could see through Dexter Morgan's carefully constructed facade, she did. And she was willing to put everything on the line, risking her career, relationships, and even her life to bring the truth to light. Her story isn't just about justice. It's a reminder of how high the stakes can be when you pursue it. Sometimes, the cost of truth isn't just unbearable, it's tragic. So, here's a question for you. If you were in her shoes, knowing what you know now, would you have made the same choices? Would you have had the courage to stand against the darkness, even if it meant losing everything? Maria's bravery makes her unforgettable, but her tragic end serves as a chilling reminder, not just of how dangerous the truth can be, but of the profound sacrifices it demands from those who dare to uncover it. Thank you for watching. If Maria's story left you thinking, let us know in the comments what video you'd like to see next. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.